So today we're talking about IULs, but mainly about how your cash value is going to grow. Because if you heard of IUL, you may know the basics. Okay, there's a floor, there's a cap, guarantee against loss. But as you take a deep dive and actually look into the policy, you'll see that there's various different account options you could put your money in, but nobody explains that. So I wanted to create this video because if all those options are available to you, I want you to understand what they are, how they work, pros and cons, so you know exactly how to allocate your money. Because you'll probably be working with an advisor, and yes, you may trust your advisor, but I really think it's important for you as a consumer to still have some information as far as how these allocations actually work, so you could do what's best for you, not what's best for your agent. So if you looked into an illustration or maybe your current policy, I'm sure you've seen there's different definitions for how your money can grow. So I'm going to break those down so there's complete transparency. So the most common option you run across is the cap and the floor, right? So the cap and the floor is an actual strategy. So typically, let's just use, for example, 10% is the cap, 0% is the floor. So here's how that works. So on the results side, your growth or your credits is determined by the strategy that you choose. So let's say the market went up 6%. Now that means you're going to get a 6% credit because remember, you're within that range of 10 to 0% at all times. So if the market did 6, you get a 6% credit, pretty straightforward. Now, if the market did 10, you get a 10% credit. Now, here's what you have to understand. If the market does 15, you can't go above that cap. The cap is 10%, so you'll get a 10% credit. You will not get a 15% credit, only a 10% credit if the cap is 10. Now, when it comes to the floor, if the market does 0, you'll get a 0% credit, meaning you'll get no growth towards your account at all that particular year. Now, if the market did negative 10, that's where the floor really becomes the hero. You get 0% credit. You don't lose, you don't gain, you stay exactly where you left off. Same thing if the market did negative 40. So it doesn't matter how bad the market gets, you're always protected from negative deductions because of the negative performance of the market. Another important note is that all previous gains are protected from negative market losses. So it doesn't matter how bad the market is, you're not going to get a negative deduction because of the market performance. So if you start off with $1,000 and it grew to $3,000 and the market were to crash, $3,000 is now your floor. Does it go back down to $1,000? $3,000 becomes your floor. And as the market drops, you'll stay there. And if the market rebounds, it goes up, you'll start at that $3,000 and compound from there. So the cap and the floor is going to be the most common strategy you run across when it comes to dealing with the IUL. Next, we have participation rate. This is where it gets tricky, but I'm going to break it down so you know exactly what to expect and exactly how these accounts work. So in this strategy, you'll see something like uncapped, 200% participation with a 0% floor, right? I know that's a mouthful, but it's uncapped, meaning there's no cap to how much you can grow, right? No limit. So the other one had a cap. There's no cap. You get 200% participation, meaning it's going to take whatever the market does and multiply it times 200%, which is pretty much multiplying it by 2 or doubling it. And there's a 0% floor, which means if the market were to crash, you're still protected against loss. So now when it comes to results, here's what we're looking at. So if the market does 6% growth and you have a 200% participation rate, they're going to take that 6% and multiply it by 200%, which is multiplying it by 2 or doubling it. So you'll actually get a 12% credit towards your account, right? The market grew at 6, you get 200% of that number, which means you get a 12% growth towards your account. So if the market did 10%, you'll get a 20% credit towards your account. If the market did 15%, you get a 30% credit towards your account. So remember, it's uncapped, so there's no cap. So we can go as high as it can go based on the performance of the market and the multiple of that 200%. Now on the downside, if the market were 0, you'll get 0. Market goes negative 10, you get 0. Market goes negative 40, you get 0. So that floor of 0% is still there to protect you from negative market deductions. Now, it's also important to understand that not all strategies when it comes to participation rates are a multiple of the strategy. It can be less. So in this example, I'm going to show you a 50% participation rate of the market. So here, if the market does 6, you actually get a 3% rate. So you get 50% of what the market did, or so you get half of what the market did. So if it did 6%, you get a 3% credit. If the market did 10, you get a 5% credit. If the market did 15, you get a 7.5% credit. So that is a 50% participation rate. So if you get a participation rate, you want to make sure you look at, well, what's the percent? Is it 105%? Is it 225%? Is it 40%? Know your participation rate, and then you'll know what you'll earn based on the strategy. And again, the floors are still there, 0 to 0, negative 10, you're still protected at 0. And if the market did negative 40, you're still protected at 0. So these are the participation rates and how those are calculated. So you'll run across those as well inside the IUL strategies. Now, the next strategy is the one you'll probably see the least when it comes to IULs. A lot of IUL carriers don't even offer this strategy, but this one is actually a spread. So here's what a spread is. So with this strategy, it's uncapped, meaning it could grow as large as it can grow, but there's a 7% spread. So the 7% spread means that's the amount of money the insurance company is going to take off the top. So whatever the market grows to, they're going to take 7% and withhold it or keep it, and then you can have everything beyond that. So they'll take the 7 and you can have anything beyond that 7 with no cap. So here's what that looks like when it comes to the results. So if the market does 10, you actually earn 3%. Because remember, the market did 10, they're going to take that 7. That 7 is their spread, and you can have anything beyond that spread. And beyond the spread is 3%. So if the market does 10, you actually only earn a 3% credit towards your account. So if the market does 15, you get an 8% credit. And if the market does 30, you get a 23% credit. So this is a spread. So this is for someone that wants a strategy that's uncapped, but they believe the market's going to grow so high, they're willing to forego that 7% so they can have everything that happens beyond that. So when it comes to the floor, right, same thing. The floor is also there as well. If the market does 7, you get 0. So that's important to understand. They're taking the first 7%. So if the market grows at 7%, you'll get 0. So if you have all your money in an uncapped strategy and the market grew at 7% every year for the next 20 years, you have to understand you'll get a 0% growth rate over those 20 years because you'll never get any growth because they're keeping the first 7%, right? So if the market does negative 10, you're at 0% floor still. If the market does negative 40, you're still at 0% floor. But that's how spread works. So you have the cap and the floor, you have the participation rate, and then you have the spread. So those are the 3 ways you'll see interest credits towards your account when it comes to the IUL. So now you have an idea of how it works and how your money is going to be credited. So the last thing I'm going to cover is what I call important information. So these are just some points I really think is important for you to understand and know about when it comes to approaching these index strategies. Okay, so the first is rates can change. So if you're looking to get into an IUL or you have an IUL, it's very important to understand rates can change. So if you're looking at an illustration or a rate chart, make sure it's current. Make sure it's not from 5 years ago or 3 years ago, because rates follow interest rates. They follow market performance, volatility, all these things factor in. So you may be looking at an outdated rate because rates can go up, they could go down. So you want to make sure you're always looking at the most current rates when you're either approaching a product or looking at a product you have currently, so you know what credits to expect in your product. So just understand rates can change based on volatility, based on interest rates. Sometimes they go up, sometimes they go down. So I really believe it's important for you to understand that so you know you're looking at current rates at all times. The next thing is that strategies can be blended. So I showed you 3 main strategies: the cap and the floor, participation rate, and then the spread. They can be blended. So it can say something like you'll get a 105% participation rate up until a 12% cap. So you just have to do the math on the first part and then do the math on the second part. So if the 105% participation rate takes you to 15%, that's great. But if it says the cap is 12, then you have to understand you're only going to get 12. So they do blend the strategies sometimes. It's not that common, but you'll run across it. So just know, don't be thrown off. You'll use those 3 tools I taught you, and you'll be able to do the math to figure out exactly what you're going to earn. But one thing you have to understand is the cap rules all. So you can have all these participation rates, but if there's a cap, you have to understand you'll never get above that cap, regardless of what the participation rate is. Next thing is understand that allocations can be spread out. So you don't have to put all your eggs in one basket, even though in all situations you're protected from loss. So you can say, I want 30% in this allocation, 20% here, 50% there. So you can spread it out however you like. So it's not like all or nothing. You can say, I just want 10% in all 10 of these strategies. So no matter what happens in the market, I know I get some type of growth or some type of participation. Because at the end of the day, they're all going to grow, and there's a crystal ball that could tell you which market is going to perform best or which strategy is going to perform the best. So spreading your money out can be a great way to diversify inside of your IUL. And then you have to understand that allocations can be changed. Don't feel like you're making the end-all be-all decision. You can have an allocation, and then you say, you know what, I want the allocation. I want to change it up. You can do that online. You can call the company directly. It's not a big deal. So you have options where you can change your allocations based on whatever you feel the market's going to do, or based on whatever you learned from the research, or maybe based on what you learned in this video, right? So you can change your allocations whenever you like. And then the last thing you want to understand is there's a difference between real performance and back-tested performance, right? So what real performance means is it's looking at that actual market and telling you what it actually did over that period of time. So if it's something following the S&P 500, it'll look at, hey, this is the actual performance of the S&P 500 over the last 10 years. So you can gauge that to say, like, this is what I expect it to do over the next 10 years. So those are actual performance. Those are real strategies that actually were in real life, okay? So that's the real performance. On the other hand, you have what's called back-tested performance. So some people are for it, some people are against it. So with back-tested performance, what they're doing is some really smart people, they're sitting in a room and they're looking at historical events, historical patterns. And they're saying, based on the market for the last 10 years or so, if we would have bought here, sold there, bought this, held that, bought that, we would have got a certain rate of return. So let's make a strategy equivalent to that so that somebody can take advantage of what we just learned moving forward. So some people say it's great because they're looking at past events and, the woulda, coulda, shoulda. We can actually make that a reality by moving forward with that same strategy that they tested based on current market trends over the last 10 years, 15 years, or whatever the time frame they used to back test it, right? So it's kind of like, let's say you have a certain path you drive to work. You take a certain freeway to work every day, and you know exactly it's going to take you 30 minutes to get to work. But then someone says, hey, based on these studies, if somebody left your house and drove to work but took a different freeway, you'd get there in 27 minutes instead of 35 minutes. So back testing is like, well, nobody's actually technically driven that route, but they're looking at based on traffic flow and everything. So some people are like, oh, that's a great advantage. It's like a crystal ball. But others say like, hey, you know what? It's never really happened. So I don't care what you tell me, the results would have been nobody actually ran these real numbers in real life because those events are part of the past and they don't like back testing. Now, to each his own, right? So the good thing about back testing is that even though it's back tested, once the fund becomes live, you may look at it and it says, okay, it's been back tested 15 years and it has 2 years of actual performance. And you can compare like, okay, this is what they thought it would do based on past performance. This is what it actually did over the last 2 years. I can use that data to decide if that's something I want to invest in, right? So that's the difference between back testing, meaning it didn't really happen. They're using past data to determine what the market could do moving forward. And real examples are they're using actual accounts that actually exist and follow those accounts so the numbers that it's projecting are numbers that it actually did in the past, right? So I hope that helped the understanding of the 3 different ways your credits are, and that you could go back to your current policy or look at a future illustration and have more confidence moving forward with where you actually allocate your money. So that's it for this video. Give it a thumbs up. Leave a comment so YouTube thinks this is a good video so they'll send it to more people so more people can be informed about this information. And again, I will see you in the next video.